Peppa is certainly the most well-known little pig in the world of cartoons, but did you know that despite being so popular among children, there were several times when she set a terrible example for everyone? One of those times happened in the episode School Project. Peppa comes home and tells her family that she needs to make a castle for her project.
I am doing a new school project.
Which gets Daddy Pig quite interested. After all, he is an architect. So, he suggests they use a cereal box as the castle walls and 2 cups as the castle towers. But Peppa simply dismisses her father's idea and says she needs something really good. And if you look closely, you'll notice how Daddy Pig's expression changes from cheerful to someone who's just been completely belittled. Poor Daddy Pig. In fact, he, along with George, are the 2 characters who suffer the most from Peppa's misdeeds. But they're not the only ones, as you'll notice. One of the main victims of the Pink Pig is her best friend, Susie. In one of the episodes where this is clear, Peppa calls her friend to say she doesn't know how to whistle. At that moment, we can see the selfish side of the character who first felt happy when she thought her friend also couldn't whistle. And then when she found out Susie could whistle and she couldn't, she got so annoyed that she simply hung up on her friend. Peppa, maybe it's time to learn to be happy for your friend's achievements and put a little selfishness aside. Now, let's talk about poor George, this baby who almost always has to give in to his older sister's whims and commands. Sometimes it seems like Peppa's favorite sport is to make her younger brother cry. Like in the episode Snow, where the 2 siblings go out to play in the snow on a day when there's plenty of it. And they were running happily until the piglet trips and falls face first into the snow, and like the baby he is, George simply laughs at the situation. Of course, the vengeful Peppa doesn't like that at all, and ends up getting back at him shortly after. She simply makes a snowball that's practically the same size as her little brother, and throws it on the child. And of course, George starts to cry. After all, he's practically still a baby. That's not nice, Peppa. You shouldn't do that. Someone should tell her that. Besides Susie, in another episode, Peppa ended up arguing with another one of her friends. This time, the chosen one was Rebecca Rabbit, and incredibly, everything happened because of George. Peppa's younger brother was playing with Richard, Rebecca's little brother. But out of nowhere, the piglet destroyed the little friend's sandcastle, which may show that there is a bit of malice in the piglet too. Richard then returns the favor and does the same thing with George's sandcastle, and the 2 start crying. So Peppa decides to argue with Rebecca, putting all the blame on the rabbit's brother.
It was your brother's fault.
When in fact the blame was clearly on George, who started the whole thing. I think Peppa missed the classes on injustice from Madame Gazelle. And if you've ever watched Peppa, comment #Peppa down below so we know who's watched the Pink Pig. Speaking of the Pink Pig's favorite target, let's talk about her father. Constantly, the patriarch of the pig family is his eldest daughter's main target for ridicule, especially when she wants to undermine his self-esteem by repeatedly stating that he has a very big belly, which is true, but that doesn't mean he enjoys hearing that over and over again. One of these times was when Grandpa Pig built a treehouse for Peppa and George to play in. That's when the little piglet had one of her most devious ideas, to create a password to enter the little house. And guess what the password was? Daddy's big tummy. Well, it seems like the piglet really enjoys publicly humiliating her good old father who took care of her all her life.
Daddy's big tummy.
I don't know about you, but I find that really wrong. Speaking of the treehouse, it was also involved in another episode where Peppa decided to do another nasty thing to George. But not just to him, also to his little friend Richard, Rebecca Rabbit's brother. The 2 boys were playing peacefully in Grandpa Pig's treehouse, where they and their friends, accompanied by the 2 boys, were playing together. However, suddenly, when Pedro and Danny arrived on their bikes, the pink piglet decided that it would be a place just for girls to play and have tea, and promptly threw the 2 little boys literally out on the curb without any ceremony. And, in this case, let's be fair, Peppa had the help and support of the other girls, even though the idea was totally hers. Peppa really has trouble sharing her things. Going back to talk about Peppa's best friend Susie, we couldn't forget the time the 2 friends were playing together at Peppa's house in the episode The Quarrel. And Susie then had the misfortune, believe it or not, of winning twice in a row against Peppa. After all, the piglet is too good to lose. The show's protagonist then doesn't admit defeat and promptly points to her best friend and states outright that the little sheep had cheated in the game.
You cheated!
And at that moment, when the 2 were exchanging looks of accusation and anger, Susie's mother came to pick up her daughter. So, outside the house, the 2 continued arguing, saying that one wouldn't talk to the other anymore, which surprised the girls' mothers. Then the creepiest thing happened. Mommy Pig called Susie's house so the 2 could apologize to each other. Then Peppa said she wanted to apologize for saying her friend had cheated even though Susie had actually won fair and square. Those were Peppa's words. Then Susie hung up on Peppa, and honestly, I don't blame her, since the sheep hadn't done anything but win the game fairly. Anyway, that was definitely one of Peppa's biggest displays of selfishness. We couldn't skip talking about the episode where George got sick. That day, many things ended up revealing the real behavior of the show's protagonist. First, Peppa tried to convince her parents that George wasn't that sick, especially after she found out that he wouldn't need to go to the hospital. Clearly, Peppa was insinuating that George might be pretending. Later, when it got to night, Peppa was clearly annoyed because both her little brother's sneezes and coughs were very loud, and she believed that that would disturb her sleep. In other words, she cared much more about herself than about her younger brother's health. She even asked the boy to sneeze more quietly, as if he could really control that. Then she looked up disapprovingly and said it really seemed like that would be impossible. That's definitely a selfish attitude from Peppa. Just stopping by to give you a quick reminder, subscribing to the channel is one of the best things you can do right now, so you won't miss our next videos. Another victim, let's say, of Peppa's cruel words was poor Mr. Potato. In the episode Mr. Potato Comes to Town, where the children are listening to the vegetable talk about the best ways to have good health, he talks about physical exercise and nutrition, and at that moment, he makes a serious mistake of telling everyone they should eat fruits and vegetables. But the thing is, Mr. Potato is actually a vegetable too. So, Peppa asks if they shouldn't eat potatoes too, which kind of leaves Mr. Potato speechless. As if that wasn't enough, right after that, the kids start a quick debate about whether Mr. Potato is a normal vegetable or not. Then Peppa states that actually the veggie man isn't a normal vegetable, which is true, but it still sounded kind of mean. At least, that's how it seemed by Mr. Potato's face. After all, I think he was afraid of being eaten right there if they concluded he was a normal vegetable. On the list of Peppa's mean things, there's also the imitation and mockery of her best friend. In one of Peppa's episodes, she imitates Susie and says the little sheep is as noisy as her. This shows that Peppa has a complex and doesn't want to be the worst at absolutely anything, always having to belittle someone so she can feel better about herself. And that certainly isn't the attitude of someone who wants to preserve a friendship. That's why we shouldn't do that to anyone. Remember when we said that Peppa's favorite victim was actually her own father? Well, in the same episode as the treehouse, when everyone goes to eat the cookies made by Granny, to seal with a golden key the humiliation suffered by the kid's father, Peppa makes everyone repeat once again the same password that had been used to enter the treehouse, Daddy's big tummy. Of course, everyone laughed at Daddy Pig, but if you look closely, practically all of them have the same shape, being all extremely round. So Daddy certainly isn't the only one with a big belly there, but he's the only one who hears it all the time. And look at the poor guy's face! Really, it seems like he didn't like that idea of a secret password at his expense. Honestly, I think Mommy and Daddy Pig should teach Peppa some good manners while there's still time. After all, she's a child and can improve. And there's certainly nothing better than watching cool and fun videos, so we're putting 2 options on the screen for you to choose from and keep watching great videos with us. Just click on whichever you prefer, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, and until next time.